Snowbreak Containment Zone. I was lucky enough to be given access to this game prior to launch, and I was lucky enough again, even after my previous tier list, to be given access once more, so thank you to TapTap for sponsoring this. However, some of my opinions since then have changed. I've gotten the opportunity to playtest multiple different units, as well as some of the on-banner units that will be out once you guys get access to the game itself, and I have different thoughts on where units should rank. With that being said, here's my finalized tier list, which should be showing up as of right now. But I'm going to be going in depth on some of the units I personally think you should really be focusing on building, or at least why they're good in the first place. I'll also be talking about some of the downsides of certain weapon archetypes, because yes, some are really good, but a lot of times, depending on the scenario, they may not be worthwhile to actively slot into your team at that moment, unless their skills or ultimates have some really useful effect. With that being said, one of the units I actually took a liking to was Cherno. I think that she's really good as an off-field support or damage healer, as a sub-DPS essentially. Yes, I think Life is great, but I think Cherno offers a really wonderful ability to sort of essentially slot into almost any team and work really well. Sure, her weapon archetype doesn't necessarily lend her the most accuracy, but the firing rate is nice. The variations on the 5-star versions are really good, but the main thing that makes her nice is two things. Her skill is a wide AoE effect, which I do like because personally it's very iffy as to whether or not they're going to hit proper enemies, especially with ultimate or abilities like Lives, in that they target enemies, but you may not target the one you want. With Cherno, the only downside is you have to be, relatively speaking, close to the group of enemies you want, and it doesn't have a map-wide AoE, which makes sense. The main reason as to why Cherno is great in my opinion is Berg, essentially her ultimate. The reason as to why this is so great is that it can be done off-field. Yes, she comes in, she uses her burst, and then you can swap off to anybody else. It doesn't necessarily boost her own damage, but instead it actually has its own HP and its own attack. This essentially means that you can swap on to any damage dealer you want, whether they're shotgun, sniper, whatever the case may be, and use them whilst Berg is essentially taking not only aggro, but also dealing damage. And because Berg can teleport, it also gives the ability to chase and hunt down your enemies. So I do think this is actually really useful just for the vast majority of teams. You can have a healer, your main damage healer, and then somebody like Cherno to essentially provide off-field support. Another character is Yao. She's going to be free when you get her. She's essentially a great healer. I do think she gets better with manifestations, which are this game's equivalent to constellations, potentials, eidolons, whatever you want to call them. You get them as you get more copies, but she's also free, which makes it really worthwhile to build up anyway. The downside I would say to her kit is that she has a sniper rifle. This means that she really isn't useful in the vast majority of situations, and the reason why is that multiple enemies will rush you. And there's no real point to long-range rifles like snipers if you're being crowded and surrounded by a bunch of enemies, or if the boss you're facing off against wants you to essentially do rapid-fire hits to break armor. I'd say in that instance SMGs are better. However, I think the value she provides you as a healer makes her worthwhile to build regardless. So my primary recommendations for the two characters you should be building is Cherno as an off-field sub-DPS, Yao as your primary healer. Some notes about her is that because of her ultimate and skill being healing based, one of the downsides is she essentially deploys a healing field. She doesn't do a burst heal onto your entire party. Instead, she deploys a healing field and you're kind of stuck within that, so you want to place it down where you have cover. Yes, it does give you interruption resistance, but if you're taking damage the entire time and have no cover whatsoever or no way to protect yourself, it kind of makes the heal worthless. Finally, Life. Either variation, whether it's the 5-star or 4-star variation of her, is a really useful character. I think that she's great as a main on-field damage dealer. The benefits are, if you're in cover, her skill essentially fires out rockets or missiles that are wonderful for dealing damage and only fire when you aim out of cover as well, so it makes it worthwhile to use in tandem with your own targets because you can, to a degree at least, target certain enemies. Her burst freezes enemies, and this is actually really useful, especially if you're facing out against enemies that have or deal a large amount of burst damage. This could be machine gun based enemies. This could be a large group of enemies that you want to take care of multiple times. You can pair this with Cherno or somebody else who has a wide AoE attack to freeze them and then do AoE to deal damage to all of them at once. So I do think that she is a great character. The downside, of course, being her weapon archetype. It's a submachine gun. It doesn't necessarily have the range of an assault rifle and doesn't necessarily have the drawbacks of something like a sniper or shotgun. Nor does it have the limited ammo capacity of a rifle, or revolver I mean. So I do think submachine guns and assault rifles work as your very middle ground weapons. They're good, they have certain ranges that they're best at, but they excel in most scenarios to an extent where I would recommend if you're looking at a character, please look at their archetype first and foremost to understand whether or not you'll be using them on field. Next is Acacia, at least that's what I think her name is. She will be the on-banner character for when you guys launch the game. She is really good in my opinion. I do think that the ability to slow enemies is nice. I don't, however, think she's a character that you should prioritize immediately. I understand she's the banner character, I understand she's great, but her weapon archetype as a revolver or hand cannon doesn't necessarily make the most sense. She's good as a support, not as your primary damage dealer. I think you should stick with your primary damage dealers being either shotgun users if you can get close to the enemy, assault rifles, or submachine gun users as well. Anything beyond that is a bit iffy in terms of what they're useful for and how often you're going to be using them. If you want to prioritize skills and bursts, I understand, but you do need someone who can deal decent damage when those are on cooldown. With that being said, those are my primary picks of the units you should immediately build. Everyone else is up to your personal taste. I just think these units should be prioritized. Yao is your free healer, that being the 4-star version of her. Please don't prioritize the 5-star version of her over your other units. I do think healing becomes much more important later on, especially if you're under leveled, so please remember to farm out stuff in this game. But Life works great as a 4-star and 5-star variation, and Cherno works wonderful as a sub DPS. I kind of slept on her initially during my original talk, but I do think that I would rate the main damage healers better early on than late game. I think healers don't necessarily need to be as focused on early game, but late game, when you have more high damaging enemies, when you don't have as many resources to keep you alive and enemies can destroy cover, it's a bit more important. Either way, that's going to be my review and my thoughts as of right now on this game's tier list. I do hope things evolve in the future. I do think the current banners are actually quite nice, and I do think the gacha system is nice, but I hope you enjoy. Tell me your thoughts down below if you disagree and believe a character should be rated higher. I understand that I didn't get the proper time or maybe not have the proper knowledge to test out every single character. Either way, I'll be seeing you next time.